Good evening. Let's begin today with a story which matters to the whole country, certainly should do, but the real truth of which is very hard to unearth. Around 40,000 people, our parents and grandparents, uncles, aunts, siblings, died in care homes in Britain in the first 2 years of the pandemic. As a journalist at the time, I vividly remember being told by the then Health Secretary Matt Hancock that the government had thrown a protective ring around those care homes. Well, with the benefit of hindsight, that clearly wasn't true. The bereaved relatives of people who died of COVID in British care homes, and frankly, the whole country, deserves to understand exactly what happened and why. This has erupted in the Commons today because a journalist, Isabel Oakeshott, handed a vast cache of 100,000 WhatsApp messages which had been given to her by Mr. Hancock for a book they were writing together to the Daily Telegraph. The story it's extracted is that Mr. Hancock turned down scientific advice to test everyone going into a care home and instead decided to test only people coming out of hospital. Why? Because testing everyone muddies the waters. Wow. Really, Matt? But hold on, let's all just stop right there. Matt Hancock denies the story. He said he was in favour of testing everyone until he was told at an earlier meeting, not part of the Telegraph story, that they didn't have enough testing kits for that. So he had to decide to test people from the community going into care homes or test people coming out of hospitals and into care homes. And he chose the latter group. Now, that might have been the right decision or the wrong decision. But it's a hard choice that any of us can imagine being confronted with, and in my view, it certainly is not a hanging offence. It seems there were simply not enough testing kits at the time, though the number then rose very quickly. Here is the Care Homes Minister, Helen Whately, replying to an urgent question from Labour in the Commons this afternoon.
We had the capacity to test just 3,000 cases a day in mid-March. And I'm sure colleagues will understand why the health advice was at the time to prioritise those working on our NHS front line and, for instance, the testing of people in hospitals who had symptoms and indeed within care homes, again, people with symptoms.
All right. But all that said, at the crucial time when the virus was ripping around the country, could our care homes full of the most vulnerable people really not have been better protected? And had we been sold a false protective ring story about how safe they were? I don't know the full answers, nor do you. And now we're both being told, wait for the public inquiry. Personally, I think it was unethical to release those WhatsApp messages in this way, and I think Mr. Hancock was, technical term, a loon to trust Isabel Oakeshott with them. But I agree with her when she protests that waiting for Britain's public inquiry is not an acceptable response, not fair to the families, not kind, not right. The Swedes finished their inquiry a year ago. The French and the Italians are well ahead with their ones. Ours, which has cost up to £85 million so far, is yet to begin any formal hearings and has no set time frame, no deadline. As Oakeshott writes, we all know what this means. It will drag on forever. At Prime Minister's Questions today, Keir Starmer asked Rishi Sunak to promise that inquiry would report by the end of this year, and he got a pretty dusty response about proper process. Well, I have another suggestion. Matt Hancock seems to have become one of the most reviled people in the country. Despite his book and his appearance on I'm a Celebrity, or perhaps because of the latter, he gets screamed at in the street and harangued on tube trains. Right now, he, government ministers and servants of the state are using this inquiry not as some kind of sword of truth, but as a giant rubber shield behind which to huddle silently for as long as humanly possible. Wouldn't it be far better, above all for the bereaved, but also for the development of future policy, to come clean, to put his case in full, in public, to explain now exactly what he did and why, and yes, subject himself to cross-questioning? I don't think that the case for the prosecution on the front page of a daily newspaper is the full story of what happened in this disaster, this national disaster, but I think Matt Hancock owes it to the country and to himself to give us his full story, and to do it soon.